Great leaders are often wrapped in legend. But what if some of the most iconic truths about them were lies? From George Washington's cherry tree to Napoleon's height, from Gandhi's passive silence to Steve Jobs' lone genius, history is filled with stories we love to believe. But just because a story is popular, doesn't make it true. Today on Fact Pulse, we're pulling back the curtain. Get ready to challenge what you thought you knew, as we debunk the top 10 unbelievable myths about the world's greatest leaders. Stick around to the end for the most shocking myth that's still being taught today. Chapter 1, George Washington and the Cherry Tree. Father, I cannot tell a lie. I cut down the cherry tree. This heartwarming tale about America's first president has been told in classrooms for over a century. But here's the twist. It never happened. The story was fabricated by Mason Locke Weems, Washington's first biographer, who published it in 1806. 7 years after Washington's death. Weems wanted to craft a moral hero for young Americans. The truth? George Washington was honest, but he was also a military tactician, political strategist, and landowner with all the complexities of an 18th-century elite. Myth rating, busted. A moral lesson, not a historical event. Chapter 2, Napoleon was extremely short. Napoleon complex, the idea that short men overcompensate with aggressive behavior, is based on one person, Napoleon Bonaparte. But here's the irony. Napoleon wasn't short. In fact, he was above average height for his time. So, what happened? United Kingdom British propaganda painted Napoleon as a tiny tyrant to ridicule him. Meanwhile, French records list his height as 5 feet 2 inches in French measure, which translates to about 5 feet 6 inches in modern units. Context is everything. Compared to his imperial guards, Napoleon looked shorter, but compared to the average Frenchman of the 1800s, he was totally average, even tall. Myth rating. Busted. Napoleon wasn't short, the story is. Chapter 3, Gandhi was a passive pacifist. Mahatma Gandhi is revered as the epitome of peace, the man who never fought back. But did you know that Gandhi wasn't passive, he was strategically nonviolent? Gandhi's method, called satyagraha, was about active resistance. It wasn't silence or submission. It was calculated disruption, strikes, protests, and hunger fasts, that shook the foundations of the British Empire. He even supported war efforts in World War I, recruiting Indian soldiers for Britain, believing it would help India's independence later. Direct hit Gandhi wasn't naive, he was a political genius using morality as a weapon. Magnifying glass tilted left myth rating, crossmark busted. Nonviolence is not equal to passivity. Chapter 4, Albert Einstein failed math. We've all heard it, even Einstein failed math in school. Sounds inspirational, right? But Brain Einstein never failed math. In fact, by age 12, he was solving advanced algebra and calculus. When shown this claim, Einstein once laughed and said, "I never failed in mathematics. Before I was 15 I had mastered differential and integral calculus. The confusion came from differences in grading systems and translation errors." So why does this myth survive? Because it comforts us. It tells us that even geniuses struggle, but in Einstein's case, it's just not true. Magnifying glass tilted left myth rating, crossmark busted. Einstein aced math, and then some. Man Technologist Chapter 5, Steve Jobs was a lone genius. Steve Jobs is often portrayed as the sole visionary behind Apple's empire. But Apple's success is rooted in collaboration, not solitude. Jobs worked closely with man scientist Steve Wozniak, the engineering mastermind. Artist palette Johnny Ive, the designer of Apple's most iconic products. Busts in silhouette entire teams at Pixar, Next, and Apple. Jobs was brilliant, but also demanding, and often difficult. His genius was curation and vision, not coding or engineering. Pushpin Apple's Think Different campaign. Jobs didn't write it. Ken Siegel did. Magnifying glass tilted left myth rating, crossmark busted. Jobs was a legend. But not a lone wolf. Crossed Swords Chapter 6, Julius Caesar was an emperor. Say Roman emperor, and people often say Julius Caesar. But classical building Caesar was never emperor. He was a dictator, a temporary role granted during crisis, and later named Dictator Perpetuo, dictator in perpetuity, which alarmed the Roman Senate and led to his assassination. The first Roman emperor was Augustus, Caesar's adopted heir. So why the confusion? Because Caesar's name became a title, Caesar evolved into Kaiser in German and Tsar in Russian. Magnifying glass tilted left myth rating, crossmark busted. He built the empire, but never ruled it as emperor. Vanguard Chapter 7, Winston Churchill was always popular. Winston Churchill is hailed as Britain's wartime hero. But did you know? Ballot box with ballot he was voted out of office just weeks after winning World War II. Churchill lost the 1945 general election to Clement Attlee in a landslide. Why? Wartime success didn't translate to peacetime priorities. People wanted social reform, not speeches. Churchill later returned to office, but his post-war reputation wasn't as golden as history remembers. Magnifying glass tilted left myth rating, crossmark busted. Heroic in war, but deeply polarizing in politics. Chapter 8, Cleopatra was Egyptian. Cleopatra, the Queen of the Nile. Egypt's icon. But historically, she wasn't Egyptian. Cleopatra was part of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek lineage that ruled Egypt after Alexander the Great. She was Macedonian Greek, not ethnically Egyptian. However, she was the first of her dynasty to speak Egyptian, and embraced native culture, making her a true ruler of the people. Magnifying glass tilted left myth rating, crossmark busted. Culturally Egyptian, yes. Ethnically, no. Crown Chapter 9, King Arthur was a real medieval king. Sword in the Stone. Knights of the Round Table. Merlin. King Arthur is legendary, but was he real? Historians believe Arthur may have been based on a mythical war leader, possibly a blend of several figures from the 5th to 6th centuries. But there's no solid evidence he was a real king, nor that Camelot existed. Arthur's legend was crafted in medieval literature, especially by Geoffrey of Monmouth and later Romantic poets. Magnifying glass tilted left myth rating, crossmark busted. Powerful myth, but not historical fact. Sunglasses Chapter 10, Martin Luther King Jr. was universally loved. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is now honored as an American hero, with a national holiday. But in his time, chart-decreasing MLK had an approval rating of only 33% in a 1966 Gallup poll. Many Americans considered him too radical. He was monitored by the FBI, and denounced by leaders for his anti-Vietnam War stance and calls for economic justice. MLK challenged not just racism, but capitalism and militarism, making him deeply controversial during his life. Magnifying glass tilted left myth rating, crossmark busted. Loved now, but vilified then. White heavy checkmark bonus myth, leaders are born, not made. The oldest myth in the leadership playbook is this. Leaders are born, not made. But modern psychology, including works from Daniel Goleman, Carol Dweck, and yes, even Napoleon Hill, proves otherwise. Direct hit leadership is a skill, built through emotional intelligence, failure, resilience, purpose, communication. Every great leader struggled, learned, and evolved. Leadership isn't in the blood. It's in the behavior. Magnifying glass tilted left myth rating, crossmark busted. Leaders are made, with effort. Brain conclusion, truth is greater than myth. Myths simplify the messy truth. They make great stories. But real leadership is more complex, more human, and more powerful than legend. Today we busted. Heavy checkmark Washington's cherry tree. Heavy checkmark Napoleon's height. Heavy checkmark Einstein's math fail. Heavy checkmark Gandhi's passivity. Heavy checkmark MLK's popularity. Heavy checkmark Jobs' lone genius. Heavy checkmark Cleopatra's ancestry. Heavy checkmark Caesar's title. Heavy checkmark Arthur's history. Heavy checkmark the born leader myth. What's the one myth you believe before watching this? Backhand index pointing down, drop it in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more truth-filled deep dives on Fact Pulse. Pushpin fact over fiction. History, clarified.